Welcome back to Blood 2 The Chosen. Last time we turned off Cabalco's power to open the way to their research and development section. Today we're off to actually enter R&D. We're starting off right back where we left off in the last romp through the HQ, repopulated with pretty much the exact same enemies that were here last time. Not bad. Take a look under the stairs. We see that not only has someone kindly replaced the life seat I took last time, but it's now got some batteries and flares to accompany it. Someone at Cabalco is very thoughtful. I hope I didn't kill him. You, though, I want dead. And with those guys dead, we're at the end. Yeah, that was a real quick level. You know what that entails, padding for time with more history. I hope you guys are enjoying this sort of shit, because this is the kind of thing I'd like to do more often once I'm finished with this game. Since we're nearing the end of the game, it seems appropriate to discuss the games that came out immediately before it. First is Sin. Releasing on Halloween of 1998, the same day as Blood 2's demo. Sin bears quite a few similarities to Blood 2, particularly in its futuristic setting with a mega corporation as the main bad guys and a protagonist who never stops talking.
That's right, Barney Miller is back!
With its expansion, Blade even joins in on being able to use guns 2 at a time. Differences are that it runs directly on the Quake 2 engine rather than making its own proprietary engine and a more mission-based structure, with sections of the game broken up based on missions rather than an arbitrary 8 to 10 level episode, and secondary objectives or even alternate methods of handling the primary ones that can change the nature of later levels or even send you to entirely different levels. One particular difference between it and the rest is the sheer amount of interactivity in the game world, where even Half-Life typically limited itself to finding its switch, hitting it, and then going back to whatever door that switch opened. Sin had an absolutely crazy amount of immersion in its world, including several usable computer terminals, secret items that could be used for Easter eggs, and some actual puzzles. Alas, Sin suffered more or less the same fate of Blood 2, that being it was overshadowed by the release of Half-Life almost 3 weeks later, on top of its own first impressions being rather buggy. Ritual continued developing games for about a decade after the game's release, including the third volume of the Blair Witch game, one of the 4 attempts at Counter-Strike Condition Zero that became the Deleted Scenes, Star Trek Elite Force 2, and the Team Saber expansion for Delta Force Black Hawk Down, before moving on to continue the story of Sin in an episodic format with Sin episodes. Rather amusingly, considering the original games were in direct competition, Sin episodes moved to copy Half-Life 2 in almost every way imaginable, while still retaining several of its own unique touches like the sheer interactivity of the world. Unfortunately, the first episode, Emergence, only sold well enough to refund its own development, but not to fund the planned 8 other episodes. Ritual was ultimately acquired by casual developer Mumbo Jumbo in 2007, leading several key members to leave for greener pastures, such as their CEO Steve Nicks moving on to id Software and co-founder Tom Mustaine forming Escalation Studios, now Bethesda Game Studios Dallas. Interestingly, there's some 1 degree of separation stuff going on with this game. Ritual's other co-founder, Richard Gray, had a small hand in the development of the first Blood before he was moved onto the team for Duke Nukem 3D. Likewise, the voice of Sin's protagonist Eric Mills also provided vocals for Blood 2. He's credited as simply additional voices on IMDb, but I am absolutely certain one of those voices is that of the Prophets. Perhaps most notable, however, is the developer of the expansion, 2015 Inc. While they floundered for a bit after the expansion, releasing the ValueSoft Trainwrecks, CIA Operative Solo Missions, and Laser Arena under a very fitting name, 2002 saw them release Medal of Honor Allied Assault, one of the high points of that franchise, before 22 members of the team split off to form a new game studio under Activision's banner, with the goal of making Medal of Honor Perfected, the studio that became Infinity Ward. Second, of course, is Half-Life. This one released on November 19th, just one day before Blood 2 did. Again, the two games bear some surprising similarities to one another, particularly in the plot involving alien creatures teleporting in and trying to make a meal out of you, and a love for Stephen King that influenced the story. The developers later admitted The Mist was a big influence on Half-Life. One of the main differences, similar to Sin, is the use of an engine derived from an existing one, an offshoot of the original Quake engine with modified code and other additions to turn it into the Gold Source engine. Also, whereas Blood 2 is closer to Duke 3D with its charismatic, or at least talkative, protagonist, Half-Life hews closer to the mold of Doom, with a protagonist who has a face and a name, but beyond gasps of pain, never utters a word. Interestingly, one major influence on the actual level design was, of all things, the 1982 to 1990 manga Akira, meaning the game also shares some similarity with Blood 2's sister game Shogo in having heavy Japanese influence. Half-Life also had some struggles in development, again mostly on the publisher side. As this was the team's first game, several publishers refused to pick the game up, since they feared it was too ambitious for a first project. It was eventually picked up by Sierra Online, who signed a deal for a single game from Valve. Compared to GT's financial troubles, Sierra was a more reasonable and understanding publisher, and basically allowed Valve their own timetable to work on the game. This particularly helped when the original intended release date of November 1997 to compete with Quake 2 was abandoned because the team felt that the game they had put together at that point lacked cohesion in its design and was simply not fun. One major aspect of the game's development that came about to try to fix this issue was the use of a unified design system they called, rather humorously, the Cabal, a group of originally 6 individuals from all of the company's departments who would meet 4 times a week for 6-hour sessions to work on the narrative, key events, level and enemy design, and gameplay elements, as well as watching over playtesters to take notes. While the members in this cabal rotated frequently due to the long and frequent sessions resulting in some burnout, the setup was instrumental in Half-Life becoming the success it was, and from the very beginning of the design for later games, Valve continued using the same approach to design. Valve Software is, nowadays, one of the biggest names in PC gaming, with the release of Half-Life's 2004 sequel coinciding with the inception of what would become the #1 emptier of wallets and one of the best and most extensive attempts at proper archival of older PC games in Steam. As for the games themselves, some of the most famous and popular mods for Half-Life, Counter-Strike, Dave Defeat, and Team Fortress, were made official. A sequel to Half-Life came out in 2004, as mentioned, introducing the next generation of Valve's in-house engine with Source. Team Fortress 2 released after 9 or so years in development and is still going strong another 11 beyond that. Half-Life 2 saw an episodic continuation in 2 parts in 2006 and 2007. Counter-Strike saw another proper sequel in 2012, and the next year a new version of the famous Warcraft 3 mod Defense of the Ancients came out. And then after that things kinda slowed down. Half-Life 2 Episode 3 has taken over Duke Nukem Forever's spot as the byword for vaporware that everyone jokes about but doesn't really expect to ever come out. Dota 2's spot as the #1 most played game on Steam has been overtaken by PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, a game so influential that even Valve added a Battle Royale mode to Counter-Strike. Then there was Artifact and, well, that's getting out of the scope of this. But to put it simply, Monolith Productions' fate is rather ironic. Between Sin, Half-Life, and Blood 2, Monolith put out the worst reviewed of the 3, but in the end, 20 years on, Monolith wins out by A, still existing as an independent developer, which is better than Ritual is doing, and B, still actually making games, which is more than can really be said right now for Valve. Alright, I think that's good for one video. Next time, we're ransacking research and development. I'll see you then.